Hello! In this short lesson, we're going to have a look at domains, registrars, and DNS. These are not the most exciting topics in the world, but sorting them out and doing a little bit of housekeeping there can make a huge difference in the long run and save you some potential disasters down the road. So let's jump in. All right, jumping a bit deeper into our tech basics, let's have just a slightly closer look at domains. And first off, you need to choose your domain. And your domain, of course, is your online address for your website, like google.com, apple.com, in our case, whatworks.marketing. Big thing about it is you really need to pick one that's memorable, relevant, and easy to spell. It's one thing to be really creative and come up with a new word, but if it's not relevant to your business and if it's not super easy to remember and easy to remember how to spell, you're going to have some trouble. And so one thing that's changed a little bit over the last few years is there's now a lot of top level domains that you can use, like .com, .biz, .io, which is cool with the tech kids, .marketing, which was one that I didn't even know existed until I found it for our own company, which ended up working out quite well. I would say a .com domain is usually your best choice, but really any of the top level domains will work as long as it makes sense for your business. And really the challenge is that so many of the .coms are gone. Like basically any coherent short .com domain name is probably been reserved by someone else. So I would definitely start by looking at the .com and then go from there. There are some national domains that you can get. Although again, unless you're doing work in a specific country and only a specific country other than the US, probably .com is absolutely the best one to go with. And it's one that people think of when they think of your domain name. So going with a .biz or a .ca or .io is not the first thing that people will type in when they try and remember your domain and type it in. So absolutely, if you can go for the .com, go for it. I'd also share from lessons learned personally to avoid picking a domain that's similar to a domain owned by a larger company or where there's already a website involved in it. If you do that, and to be honest, it may be hard to do a domain that has no similar domains out there, but if you pick one that's owned by a larger company, you're perpetually going to come in behind them in the search results and possibly have some real challenges in showing up for your customers. So yeah, jumping on to domains. So one thing about domains, of course, is that you've got to pick a registrar. And that's where you register your domain, much like the name sounds. And so GoDaddy's the best known registrar out there, and you don't need to host there. In fact, I'm personally not a big fan of their hosting, but I absolutely love their registration services. We've got 20 or 30 domains that we have registered for different uses that we've done with GoDaddy, and we've been there for like 15 years. And they are just great on that front. They have auto renewal services. They make it really easy to select domains. The DNS is really easy to manage. So I absolutely love them as a registrar. And again, you can use them just as a registrar. They're quite happy to have you there. And they offer support, and they'll actually reach out if your credit card's expired, all these things that could cause you to lose your domain, and they keep an eye out for you. So that's great. There's lots of opportunities, like if you're registering, say, for a Wix website or another platform like that, they may offer for you to register your domain there, but I would still do it separately through something like GoDaddy or another similar registrar that's independent of where you're doing your hosting. And the reason for that is your registration is basically permanent. Like you're going to keep your domain name as long as you're in business, but it's quite likely at some point that you're going to change your website platform. So there's transfers allowed, but depending on the platform, it can be quite a pain to actually move it. And so just finding that one spot where you can leave it is an awesome way to go. And so fairly straightforward. You want to pick a reliable vendor that's going to be around for the long haul for your registration, not some offshore company that's a couple bucks cheaper. You definitely want to pick a good one. And not that there's not good ones offshore, but I just think there's a few, particularly some of the Eastern European ones that have popped up that have kind of scared me in the past. You want to pick a vendor that does have auto renew for your domain, so it automatically renews it and sends you notifications when it's time to renew. And particularly if for some reason your domain is going to have any problems, you want those notifications. You want a registrar that has the fully featured domain name service. Get into that a bit further. You really want to register your domain yourself. You don't really want your website provider or your IT provider to register your domain, because then they have control of it. We've certainly registered a few for clients over the years because they just really just can't even bring themselves to do it. But that said, it is really straightforward, and you want to have control over it yourself, because if you lose control of your domain and your domain's not working, you're in a heap of trouble. You basically may lose it forever at that point if you don't control it, and I have seen that happen. So we're not just making that up. The other thing you want to do is save your login information really carefully. This is a really good point, and it is a tough thing, because if things go well, you might literally go years without having to log in to your registrar. And then all of a sudden something happens, or you need to do a transfer and you do need to log into your registrar. We've worked with clients, in fact, that haven't even known who the registrar was. and so let me tell you, it's some fun, and there's some sleuthing involved to go and figure that out. I can't say we've ever really had a disaster on that front, but oh my gosh, the stress and the time that goes into figuring it out and finding where the registrar is and how to log in, and the support hassles and everything else. Just put it somewhere careful where you'll always be able to find it. So the DNS, which is the domain name system, which we won't go too deep into, but basically this is a directory more or less online, or it gets you into a directory online, and this is simple language. It's not a technical explanation, but essentially when someone types in your domain into a browser, it gets looked up through the DNS, and then the DNS points the browser to the IP address or the web location where your site is located. That's basically what it does. Also has email, so it points the web to where your email is hosted as well, which are typically different places. You can use a DNS service that's separate from your registrar, and there are some great advanced services that some folk really like to use for that. But to be honest, with the sort of with typical service companies and even companies like my own company, you don't really need to have separate DNS unless there is a specific need. If there's something that you can't do and you need a separate DNS that's separate from your registrar, definitely do it, but there's generally no reason you need to do that. Lastly, these DNS settings seem really daunting, but it's usually straightforward if you follow the instructions, or as we do with clients all the time, your website provider will set it up for you. You can give them temporary login information to get it configured. Same with your IT or email provider. They can do the same for your email. They'll set it up on your behalf. And something that's really cool is that many of the current services are actually doing this automatically now. So for instance, when we set up our WhatWorks website, which is hosted on Flywheel, got to the point of being ready to launch it, and you tell Flywheel that you're ready to launch it and it's on GoDaddy, it actually will automatically log into GoDaddy with your permission and set up the DNS for your website. And it took literally about 20 seconds to do that. And I know a lot of other hosting providers offer that now. And then as well, Google Workspace, which is where we have our email hosted, same deal. You get to the point of the setup where it says you have to set up your DNS service. It asks where you're hosted. You tell it GoDaddy, where you're registered. I said that wrong. It's easy to get those mixed up, and people do all the time. But so anyhow, Google Workspace asks where you're registered. You tell it GoDaddy. It asks for your permission to log in on your behalf and set the DNS, and that's what it does automatically. And that was flawless and happened within literally seconds. And just as a last little slide here, we'll have a bit of a look at some of the DNS settings. So this A record, it's basically the address record, and although it's somewhat obscured, obviously for privacy reasons, that is where your IP address goes, where your site is hosted. There's the name server information that is actually pointing to the name server itself. There's the CNAME where there's a couple references for email. And I wouldn't expect you to know all this or to learn all this. And to be honest, I've done this a million times and I don't know this perfectly myself either. But the FTP is another thing where you enter your IP address, and that stands for File Transfer Protocol. And you can go to the back end of your website and open up all the folders that your website resides in. You can download files, you can fix problems, or get help doing those things, but that's another thing that's in your basic DNS. Many folks don't even configure that if they don't use the DNS. The www is another setting that you'll set up, basically just so that if somebody types in www, that it will forward to your main URL without the www, or that can be done in reverse if you prefer. But you want your site to resolve to one or the other of those two, either the non-www, which in our case would be just whatworks.marketing, or you want your site to resolve to the www.whatworks.marketing. We usually go without the www now. It's a little simpler, but you want either domain to work, but then again, just to resolve to one or the other. Then there's a couple of other things, like the MX records are the mail records, and as you can see, the Google names in here. That's where all the that's where basically anybody that sends you an email, the DNS points it to Google Workspace for you to receive your email. Kind of as simple as that. And then lastly, there's these text records. In one case, it's showing we use the service Ahrefs for some things, or Ahrefs as some people pronounce it. So that's a service where we've granted them access to the website for a couple behind the scenes SEO reasons. And so that basically it confirms that you have ownership of the website by having that text record there, and it allows them a certain amount of access. And then the same, that last one down there is for Google Search Console, which is another wonderful SEO and site health tool. And you basically have to do that text record for Google Search Console to have access to your website. Hopefully I didn't bore you too much with this information. Again, it's not the most exciting stuff, but hopefully if you did watch this far, it's because you needed to know a little bit about it, and hopefully it was helpful. Thanks a lot, and we'll see you on our next lesson.